Good afternoon, everybody. We had some great conversations this morning about best practice on both the brand protection and domain management space. And we thought it would be good later in the day to start to think about some forward-looking thoughts. So what do we think the future of online brand protection holds? So that's really what this topic is all about. And I want to start with a kind of government health warning. So this presentation is not about products, it's not about MarkMonitor even necessarily, although I will allude to some of the things that we've done or might be considering doing in the future. It's a little bit like the Geneva Motor Show. So you might see a six-wheel Bentley. That doesn't mean that there ever will be a six-wheel Bentley. This is essentially going to be looking at some concepts and some things that we think will be relevant to you in trying to protect your brands online over the next several years. So here is the agenda really, and I'm not going to go through these individually, they'll come up as I go through each of them, but they start with history and they work through some things that really we're advocating and doing today, right through to some things that are being talked about but aren't realistic yet in terms of their practical implementation. So these are the sorts of things that we think are going to be very, very relevant to people over the coming years. So interestingly, I wanted to start with history. As Simon says, I've been in the company since 2007, and I often say I was involved in online brand protection before there was any online brand protection, because when MarkMonitor started life, we were really doing a little bit of trademark monitoring and some domain management, but it was only around 2006, 2007, 2008 that we started to talk to people about stopping counterfeits or stopping website abuse, those kind of things on the internet in a more active manner. And the interesting thing I find is that when I think back to that period, there are a number of things that used to happen. So when I used to go and talk to people like yourselves, particularly people on the legal part of the department about, all these websites that were typo squatting or cyber squatting your domains, what a lot of people said to me? They said, they put their fingers in their ears and went la 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 la. Please don't tell me about all these websites, otherwise I'm going to have to do something about them. So they were desperately concerned. People, particularly in legal departments, were desperately concerned that if they left them there, didn't do anything about them, that gave the people a right to continue with this practice. So a lot of people just didn't want to know about it. The other thing that was interesting was I went to a conference, I remember it vividly, February 2007. It was entitled Anti-Counterfeiting, and it was in Milan. So there were some of the great fashion brands present talking about what they were doing to combat counterfeiting. And I remember one of the very famous brands standing up and talking about how they were dealing with stuff by educating customers, all the best practices in the physical space that we know about that everybody's done for many, many years. And I put my hand up because, I was new to this world and I was in the online brand protection space. And I said, what about online? What are you doing to protect your customers in the online space? And they just laughed and said, nobody's ever going to buy expensive luxury goods online. This was 2007, that's not that long ago. I mean, they literally believed that you would only buy an expensive handbag, watch, pair of shoes, whatever, by going into a store, having the full experience of the brand as they defined it, and therefore that really the entirety of their problem was about the physical space. It wasn't about the online space. How things have changed now. I mean, that brand has a massive online presence. They spend a lot of money on protecting their brand online with us, actually, today. So it's just amazing how different things were in 2007 than they are now. And that's why when we look forward 5 years or whatever, I predict things will be very different. Also, my niece used to work for one of the world's largest cosmetics companies. She used to run the UK online business. Probably a couple of years later, she started that job, about 2010. And at the time, they're actually a client of ours, and they were a client of ours then. And I used to talk to her about the online space. And she said, well, we're kind of interesting to our company, but we're not very significant. We're less than 2% of revenue. Today, that particular company is delivering close to 20% of its revenues through the online space. So, the whole relevance of online brand protection has changed dramatically in the last, 5 to 10 years. So that's why I'm giving you that historical context, because I think, it demonstrates how much things are likely to change over the next similar period. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is also a little bit of history. So MarkMonitor has very much played what I'd call the numbers game, massive numbers of enforcements, detecting very large amounts of infringing content on the internet, And we still have clients where, they measure the success of their brand protection programs by literally how many listings you can remove. What I'm going to talk about now, and I think it's one of the things that we've been preaching for probably a year or more now, is that really is a little bit old hat. I mean, if you're removing listings that are on page 50 of a Google search, Kate said earlier today that you protect, the first 5 pages, I think, or something like that. I mean, really, somebody who genuinely wants to buy a Mulberry handbag isn't going to be looking on page 50. They might be looking for a 20 quid version of a Mulberry handbag on page 50, but that's not the person that potentially would actually spend a significant amount of money on the genuine item. So I think what we've identified is that, we've played that game. It is a little bit whack-a-mole. You can remove hundreds of thousands of listings. Obviously, it's not difficult on marketplaces these days if you've got sophisticated technology, and the number of people to do it that we have. But is there any point? So, having done a lot of research in the space, which is what we do with these barometers that we publish from time to time, we've found that, most people who are shopping online do look for authentic goods. And people want to buy the genuine product and expect you guys as the brand owners to keep them safe, but most of them don't go past the first page even of a Google search, and most people don't go past the first couple of pages of a marketplace search. So if you've got somebody who is genuinely looking to purchase your products, why would you bother with what's on page 50 or what's on page 20? And that's why we've kind of moved our strategy towards trying to protect what we call well-intentioned consumers. So you can kind of bifurcate your customer base. And I remember being on a panel at the Luxury Law Summit, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years ago, with one of our clients then, and she had a Venn diagram which showed, here's the people who are buying counterfeits, here's the people who want to buy the genuine product. And there was an overlapping space, which is the people who accidentally, and we've proven that many people do, accidentally get lured into buying counterfeit or fake merchandise. But really, they're the people you're trying to protect, not the people who are out looking to buy an illegal copy, a cheap copy, whatever the price. So what we're doing now, and we're advocating our clients do, is really stop playing the numbers game, start focusing on the places where your well-intentioned consumers are most likely to shop, and clean those. So, and you'll see later on when I'm talking about business intelligence in the space, we're trying to focus on measuring success of a program by the level of cleanliness of the places where people are most likely to shop, rather than the number of things you've actually removed. So that's kind of, that is today. So as I said, as we go down the list of things that I'm going to talk about, some of them, this is happening now, but I'm advocating it because I don't think everybody's kind of picked up that ball and run with it yet. We've been talking about this for probably a year or more now. So, use technology and people to prioritize where the most infringing items are, where the infringing items are most likely to be seen are, and get those as clean as possible is really, the change in our approach to online enforcement today. Second thing, some of the people in the room, you have online stores. Let me ask a couple of our folks that were on the panel earlier. If I go to buy something online at your store, do you ask me to sign up for an account as part of that process? Yeah, sure, that's normally, but it always proposes that to you in my experience. So obviously the objective of e-commerce departments is to get as many people signed up, because then you can market to them, they're more likely to go back and shop again. So one of the things we've identified is that most e-commerce sites these days have a login. And in some cases, the ability to access that site will also have wallets associated with it, not so much in the physical goods space, but in things like gaming or in betting. There are all sorts of online existences that we protect that are not physical goods. And a lot of those actually have wallets. So obviously that login is very highly prized by criminals, because first of all, in the cases where there are wallets associated, they can potentially extract money. But even if there aren't, if you just get somebody's username and password from an e-commerce site, there's a good chance they'll be using those same details or something very similar to them to log into their bank or to do other things where there is money at stake. So we're seeing increasingly clients come to us and say, we want to combine fraud protection, so that is protecting our clients from having their identity stolen or from having their credential data stolen, at the same time as we're dealing with the risk of counterfeits or fake merchandise or whatever else is going on online. So this is what I call the convergence of brand and fraud. And in fact, we have customers today who, particularly in some spaces like social media, it's very difficult to tell whether an infringement is classically an IP infringement or is it an attempt to steal credentials, an attempt to impersonate somebody. And that line is getting increasingly blurred, and therefore I think people are starting to bring those together into one program. So that is a trend that we think will increasingly happen as more and more e-commerce is done, as more and more people rely on online as the way they take their businesses to market. Very interesting to see the Gymshark presentation today. I've worked with a couple of other clients who are in that small company growing very fast business where literally their whole route to market is through the online space. So even though they're not as big as some of our huge clients in terms of revenue, the importance of the internet to them as a place to protect their consumers and to protect their products is even higher because it's really their core route to market. So the convergence of brand and fraud, I think, is something. Next item is the growing importance of search. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't go looking for a URL. I don't go keying in www.amazon.whatever or any of the great brands. I just put them into my search bar and off I go. And it's fascinating to see that, how search has taken over our lives. And there's some stats there about the increased capability of search engines, 3.5 billion searches per day on Google right now. So it's really the way that people get to content on the internet, I think, almost universally. And for that reason, the importance of cleaning the first few pages, however many you deem are relevant to your particular business, is very, very important. The importance of looking at paid search advertising. Paid search advertising, as I'm sure you've noticed, is changing all the time. There's now these PLAs, product listing adverts that come up when you search on some of the search engines. So the ability to monitor those and the ability to do sophisticated monitoring of paid search and organic search by locale will be increasingly important to you, I predict. I think that, I go to the States quite a lot because that's where our business is headquartered. When I'm shopping for something at the same stores as I shop in the UK, when I key that into my computer when I'm sitting in San Francisco, it knows I'm in San Francisco and it proposes me stuff to do with the local stores related to that brand in San Francisco. That's how clever search is these days, and therefore it's very important to monitor it with that level of accuracy and precision. So the importance of search is something that I think will increasingly come to the fore as time goes on. This is a very interesting trend. Steve didn't talk about this in his presentation about Amazon because I don't think it's really his part of the business, but increasingly platforms having taken a very kind of standoffish stance to infringements on their platforms 12 years ago when I first started in the business, are now increasingly, Vero was the first on the verified rights owner program from eBay, but increasingly taking more and more active part themselves in policing their platforms. Now, they get into a very difficult legal position because they don't want to take responsibility, correctly, I guess, for protecting your brands on their platforms, and they can't indeed make judgments necessarily or easily about what's a genuine product and what isn't a genuine product, but they are increasingly rolling out programs related to protecting their consumers, as they would deem them, as well as your consumers, on their platforms. Now, this is not new. As I said, Vero, COPS, Alibaba's Good Faith Program, the Amazon Brand Registry have been around for many, many years. But there is a trend, I think, in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, of increasingly active programs. We work with a lot of clients in social media. Facebook Rights Manager is just in the digital content space, in the anti-piracy room we're talking over there. In terms of finding content in private pages, it's really the only choice you've got. And it's a brilliant tool. The Alibaba AACCA, I can't remember it's Alibaba Anti-Counterfeiting Alliance, has technology that they've associated with it. They're talking about blockchain, which I'm going to talk about later on. They don't specify how they use blockchain. I'll hypothesize about that a little bit later on. Amazon Project Zero. These are all examples of brands talking about, and some of them talk about removing as many as 90% of the infringements before they get reported to them themselves. I'm slightly skeptical about that sort of number, but there's no question that they're taking a more active role in helping you to protect your brands on their platform. Now, I mean, the nitty-gritty of it is, I say, Facebook Business Manager for the physical goods side of the business, and social media advertising and things like that, and Facebook Rights Manager for the digital part of the business are phenomenal tools, but they still take a lot of manpower to operate. I mean, we're operating those tools on behalf of many of our customers, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of focus to operate them. So I don't think you'll be out of the woods in terms of just being able to leave it up to the platforms to take care of it for you, but it's definitely a trend that is great. It's very positive. It shows that they're being very collaborative with us and with yourselves. But I don't think it'll completely replace your own programs going forward. But you will see more and more of this happening, in my opinion, as they kind of vie to be the place of choice for the consumer to go to and know that they're getting great content or genuine product. Business intelligence. So this is where we start to get into the concept car part of the session. I'll show you some examples of things you might want to see. But it's very interesting that quite often I talk to our clients about why they started a brand protection program. And in some cases it's protecting the consumer. In some cases it's kind of health and safety, particularly if you're dealing with automotive parts or aeroplane parts or something like that. But a very common reason is they want to understand what's going on in their customer's ecosystem. And their customer's ecosystem involves non-genuine products. So understanding the whole supply chain from where they create the product to the point at which somebody consumes it is a very important part of everybody's e-commerce business today. And interestingly, of course, when you think about it, purchasing counterfeit product is kind of the purest form of business intelligence because it can happen anywhere. It isn't limited by where you've chosen to market your products, and it tends to be less price sensitive because counterfeit products by definition are available at almost any price. So for example, I remember going with one of our team to meet a very fast growing kind of t-shirt brand in Switzerland a few years ago, and we pointed out to them that there was a whole business going on in Japan and Asia around their products. And there was a person there from legal, there was a person there from marketing. The guy from marketing said, "That's astonishing. We don't even have any distribution in those regions." And the simple fact was somebody or some bodies were building a complete business around their very, very strong brand in the Western world, in Asia, without them having anything to do with the manufacturing, without them having anything to do with the distribution, without them having anything to do with the supply, or getting any of the revenue. So somebody had worked out that they got a very good brand that was highly marketable in those regions. They just weren't involved in it. And that obviously pointed out to them that, hey, it might be a good idea if we started to find some distribution partners in Asia. So in many ways, intelligence that you get from where counterfeits are being bought and sold will inform you about your products. The other thing that we've noticed with some of our clients' accounts is that counterfeit product will sometimes be brand extensions. So, I've seen stereo headphone versions of, earpieces that the genuine manufacturer only makes available in a single earpiece version. Demonstration, there's a demand for somebody wants to have a stereo version of that product. So you can learn a lot from what is happening in the illegal space. The other thing that people are very interested in, as I've observed it, is they want to see when they take action, be it action in terms of physical enforcement or online enforcement, they want to see if that's changing the status of the ecosystem. So in other words, I do these 3 things for 6 months, does it make a difference? Or am I just spending money for the sake of it? So there's a lot of interest in seeing what impact various steps that they're taking can have. And these are the sorts of reasons why they want intelligence about their programs. Similarly, peer and industry comparison. So how are we doing versus XYZ great big brand or our similar companies in our space? Those are all the sorts of things that people are interested in. So these are the sorts of things you might want to see. This is an example of output from a system that would tell you whether you're doing better or worse over time, which are the most impactful spaces where you would see the most problems. Social media's improved, but Amazon.com has got worse, those kind of things. These are the sorts of things that we think people will want to see. The ability to have a brand protection score where you could say we were at 50 6 months ago, we're now at 65. That means that the money we've been spending on doing whatever we did was probably worthwhile. Please don't take pictures of these slides because this is the six-wheeled Rolls-Royce. Sorry. So again, this is another graphic that just shows you how you would start to look at cleanliness. So, how are we doing on this marketplace? How was it 6 months ago? How is it today? Those kind of things we think would be very, very interesting to people. How are we represented on social media? These kind of things we think would be very, very interesting to people as output from this kind of program. So we're going to work on this kind of space. We have been for some time. It's not easy, particularly when you're talking about peer comparisons or industry comparisons. We've done some of this manually for some of the verticals. I'll talk about automobile in a moment. We've certainly done this in the automobile space because the major players are collaborating and enabling us to share data on an anonymized basis. But we think this is going to be an increasingly important part for people as they go forward. So that leads me into joint rights owner initiative. So there's an increasing trend for people, and I think people earlier today have talked about how they've worked with other brand owners kind of on a one-on-one, one-off basis to work against a particular site or work against a particular infringer. And that can take the form of shared cost for litigation, shared cost for physical enforcement. We know that happens amongst a number of you. What we're increasingly seeing is associations taking this kind of activity. And I've seen it in the media and sports side of our anti-piracy business very much. There have been class action suits against certain sites. There have been programs activated by the FBI that, for which evidence has been collected by some of the music or the movie associations, but also, as I say, very much the automotive group. So we work very closely with a group called A2C2, the Automotive Anti-Counterfeiting Council. Some of you will have seen Andy Forsyth from Nissan present at this conference in the past. He, I think, is the secretary or chairman of that, but he's very much the leading light in it. But Toyota and Subaru and the various others that play a part in that very actively, helped by ourselves, they do a number of things. So they go lobby government. They go to the White House and get policies changed at a federal level to make it more difficult for people to sell counterfeit airbags, brakes, parts, all the things that are very, very obviously dangerous in the United States. But they also do things like, as I say, they work with us very closely. They allow us to share each other's data on an anonymized basis. Most of them are MarkMonitor clients, and we run programs for them individually, but we've started to create for them, a how you're doing XYZ company versus the other 5 people that are part of this program. And they found that very, very helpful indeed, because they're seeing, the relative merits of the various strategies that each of them is deploying over a period of time and the fruits they get from that versus the broader group. So that's been very, very interesting. But I think you'll increasingly see groups of brand owners, either in formal associations like A2C2 or APO, which is one of the media groups, or just informal get-togethers of people who want to take down a particular set of infringers. Clustering. So I think Kate talked about some of the work that they've done to look at people who are clearly, represented under multiple usernames in different websites, but actually are the same group of people. It's not a particularly new thing to want to do. It's not easy to do. We've actually been doing it for a very long time. We had a very heavyweight piece of technology several years ago for which we would find literally thousands of websites, which we would then take to litigation with our clients' litigation partners, and they typically won judgments of upwards. I'll just flick forward quickly to the NFL, who was one of the clients that did this. They removed they seized around about 10,000 websites with our help. We identified them. We found that they belonged to a small number of infringers. They litigated against unknown infringers in one of the US courts, and they won the rights to those and all the associated domain names and other assets that were owned by those. And there was a lot of activity around that so I won't go backwards, around that probably 4 or 5 years ago. That's kind of eased off a little bit more, but it was very much used by some of our very larger clients to identify, big litigation cases they could go after. And at that time, we were doing it really by looking at the structure of the website. So we're actually analyzing the code of the website. This one is using the same template as that one. And using significant computer power, we were able to find that thousands and thousands of websites. I think in one of the cases we ran, we found 6,000 websites were essentially being operated by one group of people. But there will be increasing attempts to do this. As people proliferate into other places to infringe brands, social media, mobile apps, et cetera, it gets more complicated, but there's still a desire to find, hey, this guy or this group of people is not just infringing us with a website that sells product or services that are infringing our brand, but they've also got social media listings. They've also got online marketplace accounts. So ways to try and connect those become increasingly important, and this is what we mean by clustering. One of the challenges, of course, is our good friend GDPR, because the less we're able to look at publicly available data, the more difficult it makes that process, unfortunately. But I'm confident that people will increasingly focus on this, and it will become increasingly important. As I say, that was the example from a while back. Interestingly, we're doing a rather interesting kind of subset of this in terms of our marketplace detection and enforcement tool called image clustering. So we've noticed that one of the ways that people typically advertise your products on a marketplace is they'll steal an image from your genuine website, and they'll use that to advertise all their different listings. We can actually go find automatically all the infringements on a particular marketplace or across multiple marketplaces that are using a given image, and with one click of a button remove all or send enforcement notices against all the listings associated with that. So just clustering around an image is a very good way of improving the efficiency of enforcement, we've found. The lifestyle shopping experience. As I say, we're getting into a more futuristic world here, but this says, we've noticed, and again, think about Gymshark, we've noticed that demography of consumer doesn't want to go to a website anymore. They want to shop on their phone. They may not even ever touch a website. I question, are websites relevant in the future? I mean, I think they probably will be, but 10 years from now, who knows? People will shop on their phone. I've even met very much older, even older than me, generation people who don't have a computer, but they do everything with their phone. So I think, the need to get at social media platforms, the need to collaborate with social media platforms via their programs such as the ones I've described, the need to monitor advertisements on them is going to be increasingly important going forward. So we think that whole social shopping experience will probably be very central to future online brand protection programs. My last one is blockchain. So hands up if you really understand blockchain. So I did a little bit of research on this because it's getting obviously blockchain gets a lot of discussion today, and I'll try and describe it in a very simplistic form. It's basically a distributed ledger. So what blockchain is very good at is proving the authenticity of a sequence of events. That's why it's very good for managing the value of a bank account or the value of a currency, because because it is distributed, it's very, very difficult to illegally break it and fake it. So it shows you exactly what happened when. So it's a very good ledger of authenticity. And they're starting to use it in ways to identify the veracity of certain products. So for example, if you could put a serial number on your product, or if you could put a label on your product, I mean, Churchill-Logo is a kind of basic version of that kind of technology for those of you that know what Churchill-Logo is. This is kind of Churchill-Logo on speed. So this is saying that we're going to have a distributed database in blockchain in which you could say, here is the registration of every single one of our items that we've ever made, and this is where it is in the supply chain. Now, the kind of dependency on this is that you're able to uniquely identify each of the items that you sell. Now, as I said, there's a product called Everledger, which is being used in the diamond industry to identify the authenticity of a diamond. So every time a diamond is cut that is being used by somebody as part of the Everledger program, they'll inscribe a miniature serial number on it, and that gets registered in a blockchain account, so that you can track that diamond around the world, and you can make certain that when you're looking at a diamond with a certain number on it, it is the real thing by checking against the blockchain account. So I can see how, if you can put a label, as I say, Chotologo is a basic form of that. If you could put a label with a unique identifier on it, on your product or a serial number, then that will work fine. And I can see how that would work at the high end of our customer's product. So if you're selling something that's worth hundreds or thousands of pounds, it's worth doing that. The challenge is, how do you do that for a bar of soap? I don't see how we will solve that problem for a bar of soap right now. Maybe we'll start to put it on the packaging. Maybe on the packaging for a bar of soap you could have a unique identifier. I don't know. But that's really there's a lot of talk about blockchain in and anti-counterfeiting. Louis Vuitton is running some program called Aura. Alibaba claims to be using it but doesn't describe how they're using it in the AACA program. But from what I can tell, it's really going to be to do with using it as a check box for finding out if something was genuinely belonging to and manufactured by the supposed brand owner. But as I say, the unique identifiers when you get to low-cost items will be a bit more challenging. So that's really everything I had to cover. I think that we've demonstrated that the last 10 years has seen the need for brand protection grow, online brand protection to grow very, very significantly. I can only believe that will go forwards more. I mean, I hardly ever shop other than online these days. I mean, it's easier for me to go and order even the most trivial things on Amazon and have them delivered the same day or the following day than bother going to B&Q to buy a spray for my garden. It's just amazing how much we've all fallen into that habit. But the venues and volumes of infringement are changing and growing over time. We think that the platforms, your behavior, providers like us will change our behavior to match that, to try and deal with it. And it will be a combination of technology and people that is the only way to solve it. We're committed to playing a very large part in that over the next 5 or 10 years. And we look forward to working with you. Any questions? I'm going to have some of my ginger presse, which is very good, by the way, if you get a chance to have any.